The military with summary channel, and today we will discuss the situation in the world on the 23rd of June of 2026. Today we have a lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to talk about the conflict on the territory Ukraine. We have important updates. You know that I've noted that when the Ukrainians attack, let's say, the city of Moscow, or when the Ukrainians are trying to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia, mainly in the northern direction, during these days and during these attacks, the Russians try to bomb and basically reduce till everything to reduce till ruins everything they see through the northern parts of Ukraine, through the Chernihiv and Sumy region. And when the Ukrainians were attacking the city of Moscow or the city of St. Petersburg, we were receiving lots of updates of how the Russians were destroying gas stations, railway stations, warehouses, ammo depots, objects of energy infrastructure through the northern parts of Ukraine. So the Russians were attacking everything they saw. When the Ukrainians were attacking in the direction of the central part of Russia, in the direction of the city of Voronezh and so on, when the Ukrainians were attacking the city of Belgorod, when the Ukrainians were trying to get oil refineries through the central part of Russia, these days the Russians were attacking only the city of Kharkiv and warehouses, ammo depots, gas stations, objects of energy infrastructure around this city. And when the Ukrainians attack in the direction of the southern regions, these days the Russians attack the cities of Pavlograd, Dnipro, Zaporozhye, so everything through the central part of Ukraine. And when, of course, the Ukrainians attack in the direction of Crimea, then every single hour, every single 30 minutes, we receive a video from the southern regions of Ukraine, from the Odessa region, from the cities like Kryvyi Rog, Kherson, Nikolaevka, Zaporozhye, and so on. So the Russians understand that if the Ukrainians attack in this or that direction, then most likely the Ukrainians use this or that part of Ukraine as a launching site. And for example, during the previous 72 hours, the Ukrainians were attacking significantly the city of Voronezh, and as a result of attack, probably with the use of even Storm Shadow cruise missiles, the Ukrainians managed to destroy the subject of military infrastructure. The Russians basically have almost reduced the city of Kharkiv to ruins. At least lots of objects through the city of Kharkiv were destroyed. We have already discussed the situation. The Russians were attacking the power station of the city of Kharkiv. The Russians attacked the warehouse and the post terminal to the west of the settlement, dealing significant damage. As of the previous 24 hours, we received lots of updates and lots of reports from the central part of Ukraine and through the southern regions. We received a lot of reports about explosions on the territory of the city of Kryvyi Rog and Zaporozhye. And as for massive attack from the Ukrainian side, we received lots of updates through the territory of Crimea. Let's discuss this situation in details. During the previous 24 hours, pro-Ukrainian sources published lots of video about the situation with logistics through Crimea. And for example, this is the first video that was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and this is a very important video because from one side, this video confirms that the Russians managed to partially stabilize the logistics through the northern parts of Crimea, especially when talking about these pontoon bridges. The Russians have created lots of pontoon bridges since the crisis with logistics on the territory of the northern parts of Crimea began worsening. And lots of videos were published on this matter. And furthermore, during the previous 24 hours, we received several more updates on this matter. Pro-Ukrainian sources published a satellite picture of the bridge in the area of the settlement of Voinka. So this bridge, according to the satellite picture, was damaged, not destroyed, but damaged. Probably the Russian authorities limited access to this area. But the most important video is coming from basically the central part of Crimea, from the territory of the settlement of Razdolne. There is a northern Crimean canal, as you can see, and there is railways. And today, pro-Ukrainian sources published this video where we can see a special operation carried out by the Ukrainians, where we can see dozens of strikes carried out by the Ukrainians on the bridge. Furthermore, during the final part of this video, we can see that the Ukrainians managed to deal damage not just to the bridge, but we can see that the train was also destroyed, not destroyed, but stopped. Probably there was something like an accident in this area because the bridge was destroyed. The train was forced to stop, so that's which led also to problems to the logistics and to the common situation of this territory. And during the same period of time, from the Russian side, we were receiving lots of updates about attacks on the cities of Kryvyi Rog and Zaporozhye. The Russians were attacking both cities with Iskander missiles, and we have lots of updates on this matter. The sources reported that the Russians used several Iskander missiles to attack objects of some of probably logistic infrastructure in this area. As a result of these attacks, lots of facilities and warehouses were basically destroyed. And here we have the video of the most powerful attack. Most likely the Russians were attacking positions, places, warehouses where the Ukrainians were storing drones. And these drones were used by the Ukrainians to attack the siege of Crimea. As for the siege of Zaporozhye, lots of explosions were recorded through the southwestern parts of the settlement, and the Russians, according to information we have, attacked and destroyed another parking site with dozens of trucks. And as you may know, the Ukrainians used trucks to move drones from one side of Ukraine to another with the purpose to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. So as you can see, lots of trucks were damaged. The sources reported that not every single truck was destroyed during the previous 24 hours. This attack took place in the morning, and when the Russians probably discovered that not every single truck was destroyed, the Russians once again attacked the territory, and as of the evening strike, we haven't received anything what kind of damage the Russians managed to deal during the second attack. And as of the siege of Zaporozhye, the Russians also attacked and destroyed a gas station through the western parts of the settlement. The next night, the upcoming night, of course, is going to be very important between the 23rd and the 24th of June of 2026, because most likely during the next upcoming night or during the next several days, the Russians will carry out their massive attack. I would like to remind you that the previous Russian massive attack took place between the 14th and the 15th of June of 2026, when the Russians used hundreds of missiles and dozens of drones, mainly to attack the city of Kiev. Lots of explosions, lots of damages were dealt to the capital of Ukraine. Today is already the end of the 23rd of June of 2026, which means that already 8 days have passed since the previous massive attack. During this period of time, the Russians were attacking the territory of Ukraine mainly using around 100 of drones. So we can say that every single day the Russians can attack the territory of Ukraine using 250 drones. So if the Russians use, let's say, 100 of drones each day, this means that they can accumulate additional 150 drones for future attacks. So since the beginning of the 15th of June of 2026, the Russians were mainly attacking the territory of Ukraine using plus minus 100 of drone every single day, which means that since the beginning of 15th of June of 2026, the Russians have accumulated probably more than 1,000 of drones, which means that during the next massive attack, the Russians will attack lots of objects through the territory of Ukraine. And most likely, and it seems that the Russians, during the next major attack, will try to break the situation in their favor. And telling the truth, I'm not sure that the Russians are going to attack just the city of Kiev, trying to force Zelensky to accept Russia's demands. It seems that during the next massive attack, the Russians will choose hundreds of targets across the territory of Ukraine, through the territory of Ukraine. And we are talking about warehouses, we are talking about gas stations, we are talking about objects of different types of infrastructure that the Ukrainians use to attack deep inside of the territory of Russia. The Russians understand what kind of tools the Ukrainians use for these purposes. They need gas stations to have fuel for drones and to have fuel for trucks to return back to the western parts of Ukraine. They need to have big warehouses where they can store these drones. They need to have lots of trucks on the territory of Ukraine if they want to continue attacking the territory of Russia with such a pace. So that is why most likely the Russians would try to attack all these objects through the territory of Ukraine. Now the Russians most likely are gathering the surveillance operation to understand the targets and what the Russians are going to do with this. And most likely during the same period of time, the Ukrainians will continue attacking the territory of Crimea. The oil crisis continue brewing on the territory of Crimea. The situation is getting worse and worse. Anyway, let's wait and see what is going to happen next. And now let's discuss several statements that were made by the Russians. During the previous 24 hours, lots of Russian politicals made lots of very interesting statements. For example, the special aide Ushakov stated that Russia is ready for dialogue with the European Union. But at the same time, the Russians report that they are not ready to have any talks with the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, and there are going to be no conversation and no dialogue with him personally, especially based on updates that we receive according to strikes that the Ukrainians carry out every single day deep inside of the territory of the Russian Federation. At least this was stated and confirmed by the President of the Russian Federation, Vladimir Putin. So which means that the Russians will not negotiate with the Ukrainians, at least with the President of Ukraine, Zelensky, but the Russians are ready to negotiate with the European Union. But at the same time, the European Union rejects any idea or any possible negotiations with the Russian side because they say that the European Union is on the side of Ukraine, which means that the Russians need to find a way how to talk with the Ukrainians. But we have a lot of, as you can see, problems with this situation. Another important thing, and this is the most important thing, that's the situation that we can see right now between Russia and Ukraine cannot last forever. And this is already this is exactly what is the war of attrition. Anyway, if this situation continues developing the same way, most likely within a month or 2 months, something is going to happen, either with the Russians or with the Ukrainians. And it seems that this is already a part of the conflict between Russia and Ukraine when we will obviously see a turning point in this conflict. Now let's return back to the situation on the ground and let's discuss everything that's happened during the previous 24 hours. As for the Zaporozhye direction, during the previous 24 hours, we haven't received anything special. The Russians continue attacking and bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine through the Zaporozhye direction, but without changes on the ground. The Russians attack positions of the armed forces of Ukraine with artillery forces, with FPV drones, but once again, without changes on the ground. At the same time, we see that the Ukrainians also don't have any progress on the ground, despite lots of statements about additional progress on the ground in the area of the settlements of Gavrilovka and Ivanovka. Despite the fact that almost every single pro-Ukrainian source report about the situation, we still haven't received anything that can confirm either both the Ukrainian counter-offensive operation and the progress on the ground. Now let's talk about the Konstantinovka direction. During the previous 24 hours, as you can see, the Russians improved their position significantly and the Russians continue the battle for the settlement. As for the previous 24 hours, more changes on the ground were recorded, especially through the western parts and the northwestern parts of the settlement. At the same time, the Russians continue bombing positions of the armed forces of Ukraine through the most northern parts of the settlement, where the main resistance of the armed forces of Ukraine is located. Furthermore, according to different sources, the Ukrainians continue sending more and more troops in the northern parts of the settlement of Konstantinovka with the purpose not to allow the Russians to take these territories under complete control. Because as of the current situation, the most northern parts of the settlement of Konstantinovka is already not the northern parts of the city of Konstantinovka, it is already the southeastern or the southern parts of the Alexeyevo-Drushkovka defense belt. So the Ukrainians would try to keep these territories, hold these territories for as long as possible with the purpose not to allow the Russians to enter the settlement of Alexeyevka-Drushkovka, because if it happens, and when it happens, when first geolocations with Russian troops on the territory of Alexeyevka-Drushkovka are published, then this is going to be a significant media victory for the armed forces of the Russian Federation, because for this very moment it would be very difficult for Ukrainian side to claim that the city of Konstantinovka still remains under complete Ukraine control, because according to pro-Ukrainian mappers, the city of Konstantinovka is almost 100% under complete control of the armed forces of Ukraine. Meanwhile, the Russians began their offensive operation with the purpose to cut the pockets between the cities of Chasov Yar and Konstantinovka, and these are the changes on the ground between the previous 24 hours. According to pro-Russian sources, there are still hundreds of pockets of resistance from the Ukraine side, but at the same time, there are already hundreds of positions of Russians. If this information is correct, and if the Russians began offensive operation in this area with the purpose to take under complete control these cities, territories, then most likely we can start counting days before we will adjust the territory in this area in the Russian favor. The Kramatorsk direction. Since the beginning of June, we have already received hundreds of updates from the city of Kramatorsk, and most of them are about FPV drone attacks through the eastern and the central parts of the settlements to the east of the river by the name of Казённый Торец. Every single day, the Russians attack the city, while the Ukrainians are trying to deploy or redeploy their forces between the northern parts of agglomeration and the southern parts of the agglomeration. The Russians continue attacking every single day. We have lots of videos. The Russians have hundreds of drones over the territory of Kramatorsk, and they're doing just one thing. They try to find vehicles. They try to find armored vehicles, tanks, equipment of the armored forces of Ukraine through the eastern parts of the city of Konstantinovka and to destroy it. Every single day we continue receiving updates on this matter, and with every single strike on Ukraine's positions, logistics in this area, we see that the situation through the Slaviansk-Konstantinovka direction continues deteriorating. As for the settlement of Liman, during the previous 24 hours, the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation reported that the Russians improved their positions through the settlement, but since the beginning of the 23rd of June of 2026, we haven't received even a single video where the Russians roast new flags through the settlement. The Russians continue offensive operation, but as for pro-Ukrainian sources, we need to understand that according to pro-Ukrainian sources and pro-Western sources, the city of Liman is in the complete and strong control of the armed forces of the Russian Federation, and the Russians with flags were just infiltration groups that managed to enter the settlement, and that's it. So as we can see right now, we have a very huge gap between mappers of different sites, pro-Russian, pro-Ukrainian neutral mappers, and just mappers, professional mappers, show completely different pictures through the Konstantinovka-Liman direction. According to pro-Ukrainian sources, all these cities are under complete and strong control of the armed forces of Ukraine. As for the northern directions, during the previous 24 hours, the Russians published another video where we can see more Russians moving through the city of Kupiansk, through the northern, eastern, and the southern parts of the settlement. More videos with flags were published by pro-Russian sources, and the Russians once again confirmed that the Russians have more or less strong control over the city of Kupiansk, at least over its eastern parts and over the Zaskolye micro-district. As for the western parts of the settlement, we don't have anything to say about this, whether the Russians are able or were able to improve their positions, but several pro-Russian sources reported that the western parts of the city of Kupiansk is also under complete Russian control. We are waiting for additional proofs about this. As for the northern directions, the Russians continue their offensive operation, and it seems that the Russian offensive operation through the settlement of Kazachya Lopan is gaining a momentum. The Russians continue advancing, and today the group of forces north reported that up to 15 buildings were captured by Russians through the northern parts of the settlement, which means that the Russians right now have strong control at least over the northern parts of the settlement. Meanwhile, the Ukrainians continue sending more and more troops and reinforcements with the purpose to stabilize the situation, but the Russians control the main logistic lines in this area, and when the Russians see at least a vehicle moving in the direction of the city, the Russians attack this vehicle immediately. So the Russians have established complete FPV drone control over the main supply lines of the city of Kazachya Lopan, which means that very likely in coming days the resistance of the contingent of the armed forces of Ukraine through the settlement of Kazachya Lopan would collapse. As for the Sumy direction, we have just one small changes through the settlement of Kondratyevka, and these are the changes on the ground. The Russians continue improving their positions in the western and the southwestern direction of the main foothold to the north of the city of Sumy. The Russians right now are trying to prepare themselves before the beginning of a major battle for the settlement by the name of Khotin. The village of Khotin is a big village to the north of the settlement of Sumy, and based on this village, the Russians would be able to continue offensive operation further in the southern direction towards the settlement of Sheskovka. And I would like to remind you that since the beginning of this year, the Russians have attacked lots of gas stations, warehouses, ammo depots through the Chernigov and Sumy regions, which means that the situation with logistics in this area continues deteriorating. And that's it for today.